Biological warfare is the deliberate use of living organisms or their toxins. These agents are used to cause death or disease, and the targets can be humans, animals, or even plants. This form of warfare, is not new. It actually has a long and dark history. Ancient armies sometimes used diseased corpses, and they would catapult them into enemy cities. They also contaminated water wells with infected material. The goal was always to weaken the enemy, and this would be done without direct combat. That's what makes biological weapons such a terrifying prospect for any nation. The agents used in biological warfare are really diverse. They include bacteria, like those causing anthrax or plague. Viruses, such as smallpox or Ebola, are also potential bioweapons. Fungi that produce toxins can be employed as well. Even naturally occurring toxins like botulinum toxin or ricin fall into this category. These agents can be spread in a bunch of different ways. They can be released into the air as aerosols, contaminate food and water supplies, or even be spread by infected insects or animals. The method of dispersal really depends on the agent and the intended target. Biological weapons are often called the poor man's atomic bomb, mainly because they're relatively cheap to produce. They can also be developed in facilities that, honestly, are hard to distinguish from legitimate biological research laboratories. This dual-use nature of biotechnology presents a significant challenge. The same knowledge and equipment used for developing life-saving vaccines can be misused to create deadly weapons. That makes controlling their proliferation very difficult. International treaties exist, like the Biological Weapons Convention of 1975. However, verification of compliance is a major hurdle for global security. The effects of biological warfare are insidious and widespread. Unlike conventional weapons, the impact isn't immediate. There's an incubation period before symptoms appear, and this delay makes it hard to detect an attack quickly. It also allows diseases to spread silently. Biological weapons are indiscriminate. They can affect soldiers and civilians alike, and they don't respect national borders. An outbreak in one country can easily become a global pandemic. This potential for uncontrolled spread makes them a profound threat to international peace and stability. The psychological impact on populations can also be immense, causing panic and societal disruption. The term Level 6 biowarfare isn't an officially defined category in international treaties or military doctrines. However, in hypothetical discussions, it implies the most extreme and devastating form of biological attack. It suggests a scenario that's far beyond limited or tactical use. A Level 6 event would probably involve pathogens of the highest danger. These could be genetically engineered microorganisms, maybe even designed for maximum transmissibility and lethality. They could also be engineered to resist existing medical countermeasures, like vaccines or antibiotics. The goal would be to cause catastrophic and widespread harm. Imagine a biological agent specifically designed for such a level of warfare. It could possess characteristics of multiple dangerous pathogens combined. It might have the airborne transmissibility of influenza, the high mortality rate of Ebola, and maybe even a long incubation period, allowing for silent spread before detection. Such an agent would overwhelm public health systems rapidly, causing massive casualties and societal breakdown. The development of a Level 6 agent would require advanced biotechnological capabilities, including expertise in synthetic biology and gene editing, areas that honestly present dual-use risks as highlighted by recent analyses. A Level 6 biowarfare scenario would also imply a strategic intent to cripple an entire nation or region. This isn't just about battlefield advantage, it's about destroying a society's ability to function. The scale of such an attack would be unprecedented, leading to long-term consequences for the affected population and environment. Recovery from such an event could take decades, if not longer. The genetic stability of the agent would also be a concern. If it mutates, it could become even more unpredictable and dangerous. That makes containment an almost impossible task once unleashed on such a scale. Furthermore, a Level 6 designation suggests a breakdown of all existing norms and treaties against biological weapons. It signifies a desperate, last resort measure or an act of extreme aggression. The psychological terror induced by such an attack would be as damaging as the physical effects. Trust in governments and institutions would erode, international relations would be shattered, and the very fabric of global order would be threatened. Understanding this hypothetical level 6 helps us grasp the ultimate stakes involved. It really underscores the urgent need for robust prevention and biosecurity measures worldwide to prevent such a catastrophe. The border between India and China has long been a point of tension. Decades of unresolved territorial disputes in the Himalayan region have led to periodic skirmishes. Now imagine a future scenario where these tensions escalate dramatically. A major military confrontation occurs along the line of actual control. Conventional warfare leads to heavy casualties on both sides, and diplomatic channels break down completely. Mistrust and nationalistic fervor reach extreme levels in both nations. One side perceives an existential threat or faces imminent, catastrophic defeat in the conventional domain. This could create a desperate environment. In this high-stakes situation, the temptation to use unconventional weapons might grow. If one nation believes the other is preparing to use, or has already covertly used, biological agents, the pressure to preempt or retaliate in kind could become immense. Intelligence failures or misinterpretations could play a deadly role. For example, a naturally occurring disease outbreak near a conflict zone might be wrongly attributed to an enemy attack. This could trigger a chain reaction. The decision to deploy biological weapons would be taken at the highest levels of government, and it would be shrouded in secrecy. This decision would represent a catastrophic failure of deterrence and diplomacy. The initial deployment of a biological weapon might be covert, designed to appear as a natural epidemic. This would aim to weaken the adversary's military capabilities and civilian morale, while also creating plausible deniability. For instance, an engineered pathogen could be released in a targeted area, maybe aimed at military concentrations or key infrastructure nodes. The choice of agent would be critical. It would need to be effective, but perhaps initially difficult to trace back to its source. This initial, possibly limited use could be intended to force the other side to back down, or to gain a decisive asymmetric advantage. However, the use of such weapons, even in a limited way, is fraught with peril. Attribution is a complex challenge, but if the targeted nation suspects or confirms a biological attack, the conflict would enter an entirely new and terrifying dimension. The attacked nation would face immense pressure to respond. This response could involve its own biological weapons if available, or it could involve other weapons of mass destruction. The escalation from a conventional border conflict to a biological exchange would be rapid and devastating. The Himalayas, a region of immense natural beauty, would become the unfortunate stage for an unprecedented human tragedy. The first indication of a level 6 biological attack might be subtle. It could start with an unusual cluster of severe illnesses in a specific region. Doctors would be puzzled by symptoms that don't match known diseases, or they might see a known disease spreading with unusual speed or severity. Public health surveillance systems would raise alarms, but initial confusion would be rampant. Was it a new natural pathogen? Was it an accidental lab leak? Or was it something more sinister? The delay in recognizing the true nature of the event would allow the pathogen to spread further, silently infecting more people. Once evidence mounts suggesting a deliberate biological attack, the targeted nation's leadership would face an enormous crisis. Scientists would race against time to identify the pathogen. They'd need to understand its characteristics, origin, and potential treatments. Intelligence agencies would work furiously to determine the source of the attack. The pressure for a swift and decisive response would be immense, both from the public and within the military. If attribution points clearly to the adversary, the question of retaliation would become paramount. This is where the situation could spiral out of control rapidly, leading to a full-blown biowar. The decision to retaliate with biological weapons would be monumental. It would mean crossing a threshold with profound ethical and strategic implications. Leaders would weigh the potential for further escalation against the perceived need to deter more attacks. They would also consider the risk of their own weapons backfiring or spreading beyond intended targets. If retaliation occurs, it might involve deploying a different biological agent, or it could be the same agent if weaponized by both sides. The world would watch in horror as two major powers engage in a form of warfare that threatens global health security. The nightmare scenario involves repeated exchanges of biological agents, with each side trying to inflict maximum damage on the other. Cities could become death traps. Healthcare systems would collapse completely, essential services would break down, and martial law might be declared. The movement of people would be severely restricted to try and contain the spread, but highly contagious engineered pathogens could defy such measures. The environmental contamination would be severe, and the psychological toll on survivors would be unimaginable. This tit-for-tat escalation is the core danger of initiating biological warfare, particularly at a level 6 intensity. Section 5. The unseen scars. Devastating impacts on life and environment. A level 6 biological war between India and China would unleash honestly unimaginable suffering on human populations. Millions, potentially tens of millions, could perish from these engineered diseases. The pathogens, designed for high transmissibility and lethality, would spread rapidly through both dense urban centers and rural communities alike. Hospitals and medical facilities would be overwhelmed almost immediately. There would be critical shortages of doctors, nurses, medicines, and even basic supplies like ventilators and personal protective equipment. The sheer scale of illness and death would lead to a breakdown of social order. Fear and panic would grip communities, leading to violence and chaos. But the impact would extend far beyond immediate human casualties. Animals, both domestic livestock and wildlife, would also be vulnerable. Some biological agents are zoonotic, meaning they can jump between animals and humans. Others might be specifically designed to target livestock to destroy food supplies. This would lead to catastrophic food shortages, and famine. Agricultural systems would, essentially, collapse. The loss of biodiversity could be immense as native animal and plant species succumb to the engineered pathogens or the ecological disruption they cause. The delicate ecological balance, particularly in biodiverse regions like the Himalayas, would be shattered for generations. The environment itself would become a casualty. Pathogens could persist in soil and water for extended periods. This would render large swathes of land uninhabitable or unusable for agriculture. Decontamination on such a vast scale would be an almost impossible task. The long-term ecological consequences are, frankly, difficult to predict fully. They could include changes in soil microbiology, impacts on pollinators, and the emergence of new mutated strains of the weaponized agents. The natural beauty and resources of the affected regions would be scarred, perhaps permanently. This environmental devastation would further compound the human suffering and make recovery exceptionally challenging. Economically, both nations would face total ruin, industries would halt, supply chains would disintegrate, trade would cease. The workforce would be decimated by death and illness. The cost of emergency response healthcare and eventual cleanup would be astronomical. Global financial markets would crash. The interconnected global economy means that such a conflict would trigger a worldwide depression. The long-term economic recovery for India and China, and indeed the world, would be a monumental undertaking. The invisible scars of lost productivity, innovation, and human potential would linger for decades, reshaping the global economic landscape. Section 6. India's Shield. National Security, Fusion, and Biodefense Strategies. India recognizes the evolving nature of security threats, including the potential for biowarfare. To counter such complex challenges, the nation is increasingly looking towards a national security fusion approach. This concept involves integrating capabilities across various domains. It means bringing together theoretical, economic, scientific, technological, engineering, and mathematical strengths. These strengths are drawn from governmental bodies, non-governmental organizations, and international partnerships. This holistic approach aims to build a comprehensive defense against threats like biological attacks, moving beyond purely conventional military preparedness into specialized areas like biodefense. A key component of India's biodefense strategy is strengthening its public health infrastructure and disease surveillance systems. Institutions like the National Center for Disease Control and the Indian Council of Medical Research play crucial roles. They monitor for outbreaks, conduct research on pathogens, and develop diagnostic tools. Investment in biotechnology and the pharmaceutical industry also contributes to national preparedness. India's capacity for vaccine production is a significant asset. This can be leveraged for developing and manufacturing medical countermeasures in a crisis. Efforts are underway to enhance laboratory safety and security, what's known as biorisk management, to prevent accidental releases or deliberate misuse of dangerous pathogens. Scientific research and technological development are central to India's biodefense efforts. This includes research into rapid diagnostic kits for early detection of biological agents, developing broad-spectrum antiviral drugs and new vaccine platforms. Advanced research in genomics and proteomics helps in understanding pathogen characteristics and identifying vulnerabilities. Furthermore, there is a focus on developing effective personal protective equipment for first responders and healthcare workers. The Defense Research and Development Organization has laboratories dedicated to research on defense against chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear threats, contributing vital expertise and technologies. The National Security Fusion Model also emphasizes interagency coordination. This means seamless cooperation between health ministries, defense forces, intelligence agencies, and scientific institutions. Regular drills and simulation exercises are essential to test preparedness and identify gaps in response plans. Building a robust biodefense also requires public awareness and community engagement. Educating citizens about biosecurity risks and response measures can enhance national resilience. India's approach is increasingly geared towards proactive threat assessment and mitigation rather than just reactive measures to safeguard its population and interests against the silent menace of biowarfare in the 21st century. Section 7. China's Dragon Guard civil-military integration in biodefense. China has made significant strides in biotechnology and life sciences research. This rapid advancement provides substantial capabilities for biodefense. However, it also raises concerns globally due to the dual-use nature of such technologies. China's approach to national security, including biodefense, is heavily influenced by its civil-military fusion strategy. This strategy, formalized in its policy documents, aims to break down barriers between civilian research and the military sector. The goal is to leverage civilian technological advancements for military purposes and apply military technologies to civilian sectors, including biosecurity and public health emergencies. Under the civil-military fusion framework, China has invested heavily in biological research institutions. Some of these institutions conduct research on dangerous pathogens. The Wuhan Institute of Virology, for example, is a BSL-4 laboratory that studies coronaviruses and other high-risk agents. While such research is crucial for understanding and combating diseases, the civil-military fusion strategy means that knowledge and capabilities developed in these civilian labs could potentially be shared with or directed by the military. This integration aims to enhance China's ability to respond to biological threats, whether natural or man-made. It also supports the development of medical countermeasures and protective equipment. China's biodefense preparedness also includes a robust public health system. This system has been tested and expanded following outbreaks like SARS and COVID-19. There is a strong emphasis on disease surveillance, rapid response capabilities, and large-scale manufacturing of medical supplies. The country has demonstrated its ability to mobilize vast resources quickly during health crises. This includes constructing emergency hospitals and implementing widespread testing and contact tracing. These capabilities are integral to mitigating the impact of any biological event. The People's Liberation Army also has specialized medical units trained for CBRN defense and response operations. However, the opaque nature of the civil-military fusion model, particularly in sensitive areas like advanced biological research, is a source of international concern. Questions about transparency and the potential for offensive bioweapons development persist, despite China's stated commitments to the Biological Weapons Convention. Rapid advances in fields like gene editing and synthetic biology, coupled with the civil-military fusion strategy, highlight the need for greater international scrutiny and verification mechanisms. Ensuring that China's significant biotechnological capabilities are used exclusively for peaceful purposes and robust biodefense is a key challenge for global biosecurity governance. Section 8. A world in peril. Global reactions to an unprecedented crisis. A Level 6 biological war between India and China would send shockwaves across the globe. The immediate international reaction would be one of profound horror, disbelief, and extreme fear. The United Nations Security Council would convene emergency sessions. The World Health Organization would declare a public health emergency of international concern of unprecedented severity. Global leaders would issue strong condemnations of the use of biological weapons. They would call for an immediate cessation of hostilities. However, words alone might prove insufficient to halt such a catastrophic conflict. Once it has begun, nations worldwide would scramble to protect their own populations. Borders would be slammed shut to travelers from affected regions. Stringent quarantine measures would be implemented for anyone suspected of exposure. Global travel and trade would grind to a halt, far exceeding the disruptions seen during previous pandemics. There would be a desperate rush for medical supplies, vaccines, if any are effective against the engineered agents, and protective equipment. This could lead to international competition and hoarding, exacerbating shortages. Fear of the pathogens spreading globally would dominate public discourse and government actions in every country. International organizations like the World Health Organization, the United Nations Office for Disarmament Affairs, and the International Committee of the Red Cross would attempt to intervene. Their efforts would focus on providing humanitarian aid to affected civilian populations. They would also try to investigate biological weapons use and document atrocities. However, operating in a biowarfare zone would be incredibly dangerous for aid workers. Access to affected areas might be denied by the warring parties. The scale of humanitarian catastrophe would likely overwhelm international aid capacity. The credibility and effectiveness of these global bodies would be severely tested. The geopolitical ramifications would be immense and long-lasting. Alliances would be strained. Trust between nations would evaporate. The existing international order, already fragile, could collapse. Other countries might feel compelled to develop their own biological weapons capabilities as a deterrent. This would trigger a new and terrifying arms race. The global economy would enter a deep and prolonged depression. The very concept of international cooperation on shared challenges like climate change or pandemic preparedness would be severely undermined. A level 6 biowar would not just be a regional conflict, it would be a global catastrophe with enduring consequences for humanity. Section 9. Forging peace, preventing biowarfare through global cooperation and governance. The horrifying prospect of a level 6 biological war underscores the urgent need for robust preventive measures. The cornerstone of prevention is strengthening the Biological Weapons Convention. This treaty, in force since 1975, prohibits the development, production and stockpiling of biological weapons. However, it critically lacks a verification mechanism to ensure compliance. States parties must work diligently to establish a credible verification protocol. This would increase transparency and build confidence that nations are upholding their commitments. Regular, intrusive inspections of relevant biological facilities could be part of such a mechanism. Enhancing global biosecurity governance is equally vital, as highlighted by organizations like the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Rapid advances in biotechnology, including gene editing and synthetic biology, present significant dual-use risks. Current multilateral arrangements are outdated. New governance mechanisms are needed at both global and national levels. This includes implementing stringent safeguards for DNA synthesis screening to prevent malicious actors from ordering pathogen sequences. It also means establishing clear ethical guidelines and oversight for research involving dangerous pathogens and advanced biotechnologies. International collaboration on laboratory safety standards, biorisk management must be intensified. Transparency and confidence-building measures between nations are crucial, especially between potential adversaries like India and China. Open dialogue on biodefense programs, joint research on peaceful applications of biotechnology, and shared early warning systems for disease outbreaks can help reduce suspicion and miscalculation. Promoting a culture of responsible science within the research community worldwide is also essential. Scientists have a key role to play in preventing the misuse of their work. Furthermore, addressing the risks posed by artificial intelligence in facilitating bioweapon development, as noted in recent risk assessments, is a new frontier for arms control and biosecurity efforts. Ultimately, the most effective way to prevent biological warfare is through sustained diplomacy and a commitment to peaceful conflict resolution. Investing in de-escalation mechanisms, arms control treaties, and fostering mutual understanding can address the root causes of conflict. The international community must send an unequivocal message that the development or use of biological weapons is unacceptable under any circumstances. Strengthening international norms against these horrific weapons, coupled with robust verification and proactive global cooperation, offers the best path to ensure that a level 6 biowar remains firmly in the realm of dystopian fiction, not a future reality. The safety of our interconnected world depends on it.